Well, I must say that I'm so happy to be here. I just want to send regards. I want to honor Pastor Sam Kyong and also Joel for really inviting me. And I think I want to begin by just honoring SIBKL for being one of the most outstanding church really in this nation. And it's funny, actually, this year I'm going to do the men's talk for SIBKL next week, not next month. And I believe I'm going to preach in the month of May, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so somehow this year I get to interact a little bit with SIBK even more. So a little bit about myself. Some of you may heard of me, may not, but that's not important. What is important is I'm married with 4 children. Okay, so our family always come first. You know, they're always the first front line of our ministry. My kids, they're all rather grown up. My eldest is 25, and then the other one was 22, and then 19. They were every 3 years we had. So 3 boys. And then we stopped, but God said, don't stop. You know, we did everything medically possible, but 5 years later, God gave us a girl. So my girl is right now 14 years old. One of the things that we wanted to do post-pandemic was actually to travel to Australia. So we are doing finalize our plan in the month of May. So we're going to have a long break and then get to minister in Melbourne and Brisbane. Okay. So anyway, just a little bit about my background. I think a lot of people thought what was interesting is that I was kind of a bivocational pastor. I honestly thought it was something very common, and I think everybody can do it. But the more I then kind of reflected back, a lot of people say it is actually not that easy to do it. But really, I want you to know that by the grace of God, it is always more than sufficient. So my little journey came all the way started with, I graduated from USM. And I felt there was a call of God upon my life. I went to the States. So from USM, I went to USA. And the joke is always, I didn't stay in USJ. Okay, if not, I would have been all the US kind of a brand. Okay, but I went to the States, had my Bible college in Portland Bible College for 2 years. I came back. By then was about 1995, I believe. And I worked in a company called Datacraft. I went there as the lowest food chain in terms of sales. And I worked there for 10 years, you know, and as a sales, and eventually became a sales director when I left the company called Datacraft. So I got 10 good years of working through a multinational company, going through the daily grind, work through sales quota, the pressure of performance, learning how to grow myself, to lead a team, have to handle with corruption, you know, office politics, and the whole works of it. Okay, so for 10 years, and I think all the way from junior to the senior management. So I kind of had that little experience. So, but what was interesting was while I was doing that, I was actually pastoring a church. The church by then was less than 100, very, very small, humble beginning. I was kind of a youth pastor, then eventually the senior pastor went into depression. Then I was asked to temporarily took over the church. So I've been temporarily senior pastor since 1999 until now. Okay, so I don't know when is the day I'm going to say goodbye, but I always keep on reminding myself this is just a temporary job. Okay, so I pastored the church while while becoming a sales guy for a company called Datacraft, and I worked through the whole thing. And what was interesting was every year I wanted to leave the company, but every year my boss would negotiate with me, and I prayed about it. I decided to stay back. But on the 10th year, my GM, on the 9th year, she left, and on the 10th year, God spoke to me very clearly that it's time to move on. Though at that moment, I was potentially a very successful IT sales personnel. I think whenever you meet any sales guy who works in a multinational company for 10 years without moving, that means the sales are pretty solid. Else sales, they move around. Okay, so by the grace of God, I was rather successful, and I left. And I still remember that my boss will always bring me to all my clients and will say that this is the most stupid sales director ever. Datacraft, you know, by then had all their desire to expand, and now they are called actually Dimension Data if you are in the IT industry world. And you know, a fair bit of my friends are still very much business owner of IT right now. And so she always said, this is the most stupid guy, you know, and yet I thought it was the most humbling to be able to serve God. So I quit, and And then I went full-time pastoring for only 3 months. Okay, I find that I had so much time at hand, and I honestly had a few opportunity to be on a retainer list because I was a sales director and I had a lot of contacts. I think by then Datacraft did almost every bank's networking. And Maxis, DG, all of that. And I had the client. But I decided not to go back to the industry after I prayed about it. And 3-4 months down the road, I think on the 6th month, by the grace of God, I purchased a restaurant. So I became an entrepreneur. So I went through the whole journey of from the lowest so-called food chain all the way to be a sales director, senior management, and then become an entrepreneur, and went through the challenges as an entrepreneur. So I used to deal with white collar people, right? Professionals, now I deal with laborers, I deal with permit, I deal with refugees, I deal with police, I deal with the whole challenges of running restaurant day in, day out. And I did that for 14 years until 2018. So all this while I was pastoring the church, and while doing so, and I really enjoyed it. Monday is my restaurant day. And then obviously the joke is if you see me on Monday, you got to pay for the food. If you don't see me on any other day, it's all free. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. But we were very generous just to feed a lot of people. In fact, by then in the mall, to the management of the mall, it was known to be a place that we fed the poor as well. So whenever there's poor people who walks into the mall will say, you go to Assam House, they always feed you there one. And we kind of supported the orphanages around where we are. And but the entire journey of entrepreneur was something that and while pastoring the church as well. So 2018 was the year where I decided to moved on and sold everything or closed down everything. A lot of people would tell me that, wow, Pastor, you're so smart, just before the COVID, but actually I wasn't smart. Actually, I feel for the one that took over the restaurant, okay, which is really a friend of mine, and I consistently reach out to the person. But anyway, they are doing well. So long story short, I think what was unique about it is I think I went through almost every so-called every steps of marketplace while pastoring and leading the church. Okay, so a little bit of, I think I was telling Joel, if I can bring down all of us who work in the marketplace, and I think I've been to a lot of marketplace talk, seminar, conference. I think there's always a cry that wants us to make a difference. But oftentimes, I hear a lot of stories of financial freedom, and literally stories of how they eventually get out of debts. But I want you to know that in my humble opinion, I think that should be the smallest chapter if you ever want to write a marketplace story about you and God that make a difference. I always try to synthesize everything of marketplace. That means if I were to be able to write a marketplace book about my life and about your life, I think it must contain at least 4 different chapters. And if I can give you a big understanding of these 4 chapters, and with that, I think we can transit to potentially dialogue or whatever, okay? I was asked to only do 15 or maximum 20 minutes for my past 30 years of working life, okay? So if you have a opportunity to write a book about your 25, 35 years of working in the marketplace or more, you must contain 4 chapters. Let me just give it to you, okay? First of all, you want to contain a chapter of godliness. That is huge. So in my entire journey, I had maybe about 30 over cases of learning how to say no to bribery, learning how to maneuver through threats, and I've lost a lot of deals, honestly. And by the grace of God, I've seen the grace of God that came through. Some of them actually became a friend. One of them actually became a Christian. That's because I talked him out of wanting to receive a bribery. He eventually cut me off, honestly. But then, as things go around, he hit a patch of problem. Then he called me and I helped him. Then he's actually right now part of our church. So I had to deal with that. So we have to write a story about godliness, and I think all of us wants to do that. It looks differently to every industry, and I categorize that to all the one night stand, the drinking, the being drunk, the immoral activities, and the bribery, corruption, all of that. Okay, I categorize just writing a chapter about godliness. The second chapter that you want to write is about the grace of God. And I find that sometimes in the marketplace, people are not very gracious. So if you work for a multinational company, it's a very stack rank company where you do not perform well, they stack rank you. And if you are the lowest, then you're the first to go. And I understand all of that. I have to let go some of the staff that could not perform. And I fought so much for them to help them to go through the best possible transition. I need to learn how to have maneuver difficult conversation with my staff who just didn't perform well, and they were just not suitable, and trying to help them to find a better company to work with, and just the grace of God. So I think in that little journey, because of the grace of God, at least 5 of the people who works in Datacraft ended up got saved, and they are part of our church. Actually, some of them is now a leader in our church as well. So that's the second chapter you want to write. That means every time you go, you bring the grace of God, and you're going to meet people who are depressed, whom the husband wasn't faithful to them, and they didn't know what to do, and you wanted to be someone that bring about that grace and the love of God, right? And then the third one has to be generosity. So you want to be able to write a powerful chapter of generosity. So I have mine, and a quick story was, I think there was one day, Datacraft, I think 5 engineers walked into BMW and bought cash BMW. And so I want you to know that I remain a Proton supporter. And a lot of my peers and even my junior will ask, why don't you move away your Proton Vira or Waja and get a BMW? And I always tell them that really car for me is really a car. And people ask me what happened. I honestly, the first building that the church purchased, I gave everything away just to be the very forefront person that supported, and the church was very young by then. There was just 100 over of us. So I think write a chapter of generosity in your marketplace. And then the last one is a chapter about the gospel of Christ. You wanted to be able to be an instrument to help people to connect the dot. Who God is. So a very funny story that I tell on and off is when I started to work for Datacraft, and I clock in, and every Wednesday we have prayer meet. So at about 5:30, I will leave the office. The moment I left the office, my boss will call me. He says, "Tim, where are you going? It's so early." And I'll say, "Oh, boss, I'm a pastor. I need to be at a prayer meeting. It's only right for a pastor to be at a prayer meeting." I said, okay. Remember, please finish your job. Okay. But after about 6 to 7 months, and that's where I had one of the biggest breakthrough. And to be very transparent, I think at the end of my 1.5 years, I think I exceeded achieving my quota for about 300 to 400%. I was the best, but in fact, I earned more. I was the #1 earner in terms of salary and commission, and even higher than my general manager. So that caused a lot of discussion by then. So I still remember when things started to turn around from absolutely a junior who knew nothing about sales, but just being honest and just being hardworking and look to God, and by the grace of God, favor upon favor. My boss then will come to me every Wednesday, not every, okay, but Wednesday, whenever she sees me in office, she'll say, "Tim, aren't you got prayer meeting or not?" I said, yeah, got. Okay, please go. Please remember, pray for my Maxis deal. I remember your prayer very powerful. Okay, please go. Just that little transition of including God in every capacity. So I always encourage every marketplace people, you must at least consist 4 different chapters. Some of us write a powerful chapter about generosity, but we don't write anything about the gospel. Some of us write a powerful chapter about godliness, but maybe not enough about the grace of God. So I want to encourage every one of you who works in the marketplace. I generally use this 4 grid or 4 quadrant to help us to be someone that bring about who God is. no matter where we are. All right. And I think I will just kind of end there, and we can dialogue and we can talk from entrepreneur to management to, I don't know, whatever you want to talk about. All right, Joel.
All right, thank you, Pastor Tim. Yeah, why don't we give him a round of applause? But I'm going to invite him to have a seat with me up on stage. All right. And for those of you who are online, feel free to drop the questions in the Zoom chat. I'll pick it up on my phone. And for those of us who are here physically as well, go ahead and shout out your question. And I'll just repeat the question so that all of us can hear it. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and shoot. All right. So before we were chatting today, I told Pastor Tim, do you know when's the first time I met you? Then I said, 20 years ago. Wow. Can you believe that? I didn't even meet my wife then. I didn't even meet SIBKL then, but I met Pastor Tim because he came and spoke at my youth camp, and I was 16 and he was probably in his late teens as well, right? And one thing that really struck me of Pastor Tim is that he was engaging culture. You may not remember this, but he identified something that he had watched on MTV. And first thing I was like, wow, Pastor can watch MTV, not bad. So, and I happened to be in KL visiting my grandparents then, and I happened to watch this same thing. And it was basically the bishop in, I think it was Uganda, who was under a lot of fire for advocating abstinence when the whole country then was advocating using contraception. Basically condoms. And I was like, whoa, this pastor is able to engage with the culture. So something along those lines, I want to ask Pastor Tim, how can we best engage with the community around us? So you talked about making a difference, but maybe to even go to the next step of making disciples, what's the best way to engage with the community that I think many of us, so there are people who are in business, people, professionals here, and of course, people in church. How do we engage the community around us best?
All right. So obviously, we never rehearse, so it'll be my first time. So I'll just be impromptu. I think for Christians, we need to be good interpreter of the Bible, but oftentimes we are poor in interpreting our culture. Every culture has what they call artifacts. Things that icon. Starbucks is a culture artifacts. It's known at what we call the third place because they wanted you to be able to go to work, home, work, and that is the place you do the business. And that is what we call a cultural artifacts. TikTok is a cultural artifacts. So I think Christians do not do well in interpreting our culture. Because of that, it was very difficult to take the word of God and I think powerful engage with the culture. That's just my humble opinion. I think we need to grow in that. Listening, understanding, asking questions. I think all are part of the new learning. But if you are in a professional to engage the culture, I always tell that the challenge for marketplace is this: it's a big spectrum of business owner, entrepreneur, all the way to employee, middle management, and high senior management. They're all very different breed and species, if I can say that way. Employer, right? Employee think very differently from an entrepreneur. Whenever I reach out to an entrepreneur, I'll tell them that, hey, you know what? Let's have live group every Friday. Let's say we say every second week of Friday. You know what? They block, it's in their schedule, and they will deliver because there are people who plan. They're entrepreneur. You put an entrepreneur under an employee kind of a live group leader, entrepreneur die. They won't go back to the live group. You know why? Because the employee mentality is not as strong as an entrepreneur who have a strong growth mindset. So all these are insights that you lead, then you kind of know. So whenever you talk about wanting to engage the culture professionally, knowing where you are, your sphere of influence is very important. So if you are just a junior, your job is to know how much Milo you can take. You cannot influence at all at that moment. Your influence is actually your excellence. If you are someone that's absolutely no excellence at a junior level, you no matter how much you talk about the gospel, it's all just white noise, honestly, if I can just be very honest. But when you become a middle management person, you are someone who implement policy, and you have a chance to bridge the lowest rank and the higher rank. But when you become a senior management, you are policy creator. And that's when you can change a lot of things. When I took over the restaurant business, when I took over the restaurant business, all the employee, laborers, they scream at each other to get things done. And the first day I sat down there doing my work, it was just all screaming. So I knew I am a policy holder. I can change the policy. I gotten every one of them to sit down, and I create a culture whereby no more screaming. Only the day I scream, you start screaming. And for 10 years, I never scream. I taught them how to respect each other. I teach them how to have conversation. Simple thing. And then you reward the culture, right? And then you get it done. So if you want to influence professional engagement, so I'm trying to say that it depends where you are, your sphere of influence, your faith conviction. It's a amalgamation of that, I think, that helps you to chart how does influence and engaging your culture looks like. And I think it looks very differently to different one of us. So that's my long answer to a short little question. I can't give you more unless we can narrow down to where you are.
All right. I think if you got any of those questions, we can PM you separately or something like that, and then we can get more coaching and mentoring from Pastor Tim. We'll be teh tarik with Tim, is it? Yeah. We've got a question from the crowd. So you mentioned you're 10 years in Datacraft, and you've been a temporary senior pastor for the past 24 years. So what makes you so faithful? What makes you so loyal in companies? Because young people, young adults are not as faithful. They say, "Well, you've been working here for 3 years, very long." So what keeps you so faithful and loyal?
Okay, so obviously the culture has changed. I think the generation before me are potentially even way more faithful. I think, so honestly for me, my perspective when I was working was, obviously I want God to be able to use me, but I was an easy person to be pleased. So I'm a minimalist. When it comes to the things of the world, I'm really a minimalist, which means I can live with whatever I have. So I have no problem to drive a Myvi. I took a train to be here. I'm really chill. Most of the shoes I wear are all my son's shoes who they don't want to wear, then I wear. So when it comes to all that, so I think my configuration helps me to be easy with it. But the other side of, I think I was faithful to stick in a company called Datacraft was, I sort of had an encounter with God when I went into that company. And I felt that was exactly where God wants me to be at. And I cannot deny, I was doing sales, I was successful, and the commission was extremely good. So I think it's the whole combination, and I feel most probably I derive a rhythm of life that enables me to pastor and also work, and I got that rhythm well. So the rhythm has a couple of factors. I had a great team of sales and engineer who supported me day in and day out. My engineer will take all the drinking that's needed, they'll take it for me. My salespeople will take in any additional job, overnight tender, they will take it for me. So I had a team who really worked together very well. I had that. I had the trust of my boss. So at the end of my couple of years, maybe 2 to 3 years, I actually only worked 4 days. My boss will come to me and say that, "Hey, Pastor, Sunday, I'm sure you're very tired. You come in Monday after lunch, okay? By Friday after lunch, you can go back." So I really had favor. But that favor just doesn't drop. That favor comes with years of excellence, performance, trust, character. It's a whole package, I think. I don't think anyone has seen me gotten angry in Datacraft. I can't recall. So I think that consistency is very critical.
Thanks, Pastor Tim. Consistency. And by the way, the taking a train thing is true story. I had to give him directions to walk to Wisma Maran where we are at. So along those lines, talking about how you've been quite easy, how you've been quite simple about things. But I think the question is, how do you juggle? And you may want to insert a different word to this. How do you juggle having 4 kids, having basically running the church, as well as running your business and then moving into entrepreneurship later? How do you manage all this in terms of your time and yourself, your own mental health? Yeah.
Okay. Obviously everything is really the grace of God, and I cannot deny without the grace of God we achieve nothing. But Paul says this, he says, but because of the grace of God, he says, I work harder than every one of you. So it's almost like a paradoxy, right? You sort of had the grace of God, yet because of the grace you labor. So I believe in that package. We do the best that we can. I've thought about, because I've consistently been asked this question. So I tell people, you need to handle 3 things, okay? I think to sort of wanting to live a certain life drum beats. And I think this is the sacrifice you need to decide and make for yourself, okay? Number 1, you must sort out your desire. I think the first word is desire. So it took me years since my uni days to sort out my desire. I really want to serve God, which is why I went to Bible college. I paid myself. I literally work 20 to 30 hours weekly, and on holiday, I work 20 hours a day, just 2 jobs, day and night, to self-support, because I came from not a rich family. So you have to really sort out your desire. I met a lot of people who will always say this, I wish one day I can become a life group leader. And then, but I have no time. It's not true. It's just that you were not very truthful with your desire. So people say, right? Yeah, I desire to love God. Post-pandemic, struggle to come to church. So convenient. But we can go everywhere. So you have to really sort through your desire. Your desire, you must be honest to yourself. And for every cases I deal with, I always want to know what's really your desire. Okay, so once you're clear with your desire, then you need to be people of discipline. That's the second word you got to wrestle. So desire is your internal world. Discipline is your external world. Because it is only disciplined people, they are always a margin above the others. You talk to any top company CEOs, they're very disciplined. What time they wake up, what time they exercise, and I try to be like that. Of course, I got lots of my weaknesses, ask my wife, but I am rather disciplined. What time I wake up, exercise, all of that, right? So first of all, sort through your desire. Secondly, sort out your discipline. One is your internal world, one is your external world. The third thing you need to do is develop a rhythm. So desire, discipline, develop. Develop a rhythm of life. Have you ever thought about people who run and they can never get tired? Why? They develop a rhythm that can sustain them to keep on running. So developing your rhythm is extremely, extremely important. So I've always learned to develop my rhythm. Right now I'm doing Witten, I'm doing master, and lots of books to read. I think every day, every week, we have like 100 to 200 pages to read, then to write, then to respond, then to comment, then papers, and really. So I develop a rhythm. So sometimes my rhythm can be 4:30 a.m. I'm up in the morning to clock in 2 hours of studies. then to do my exercise, then to send my kids to school, then to meet people for breakfast, then to go to church. I mean, to do all of that, you need to create a rhythm. So 3 thoughts. Sort out your desire and be honest about it. Have discipline, work on your weakest link. And third, learn to develop a rhythm. Okay, I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Pastor Tim. Desire, discipline, and rhythm. Interesting. I think as you were talking about it, you're talking about, how God had led you into different places. So do you know that is where God wants you to be at that point of time? You talked earlier about that little encounter in Datacraft, right? So how do you know for sure? And maybe I'll just add in a personal thing, because sometimes I feel the place where God has called us to be is sometimes the most challenging, right? So how do you know for sure that that's the Lord that's calling?
I think hearing God's voice, it's really a journey. I've made a lot of mistakes. One of my biggest mistake was actually I thought I heard God, and maybe I did, I don't know, was to lead a church to buy a piece of land that I did not have enough money to raise to build it. Those of you who are with our church, or that's a story by itself. Where we are in the building was really by the grace of God. We are debt free right now. That's simply because the land that we purchased that we could not build because we did not have money. When we sold it, we earned more than double, which then helped us to finance debt free for what we have today. So in hindsight, it was really the grace of God. So all my Amor friends will say, wow, Chinese men are business minded. I'm like, we are so stupid. Okay, I was business minded. It was really the grace of God. So hearing God's voice, it's always a journey. But I think for Malaysian, we are generally very vulnerable because we always love the subjective voice of God. We love the prophetic. We love the dream. We love the God says this. If I can just kind of work on that and say this, and then I'll answer you a little bit more directly. Prophecy is 1/4 of how God leads us. Your personal prayer, the peace of God. Principle, absolutely important. And then maybe the third one is the providential hand of God, something that God has gone there before you and opened that door. And maybe people counsel, all this. So there are so many different things that help us to make greater decisions in life, I think. I just feel Malaysians are very vulnerable. Why I was vulnerable as well. So hearing God's voice to know where, it's really that little journey that all of us need to navigate. But for me, when I mentioned about Datacraft, where God wants me to be at, was one of those most ridiculous confirmation from God. I'll tell you a quick story. So when I joined Datacraft, I really felt God gave me a verse in Isaiah 47, which sort of says that I'll teach you the way to profit. Long story short, I felt God wanted me to be part of Datacraft. I went for the interview. My boss interviewed nine candidates. I was the last one. I was the least experienced. I have no car. I have no handphone. I just got back from Bible college. My boss actually looked at my resume and said, what does the Bible college has to do with all? Why did you put your Bible college as a part of your resume? I said, I fear God. She kind of looked at me, what does that have to do with this? Okay, she kind of brushed it aside. Okay. But she ultimately told me this. She said, Tim, I said no to 8 other experienced and candidate was because I felt you were the most honest out of all them, which is why I chose you. So I went into Datacraft. At my second year, there was a whole bunch of campus people that got saved. I thought it's time for me to quit. So when I went into Datacraft, I told God I want to only serve in the marketplace for 5 years And I think I want to go back to full-time. That was my prayer. Only me and my wife knew about it. At my second year, I was about to quit. I wrote a letter and I'm going to submit it to my boss. Just a day before I submitted to my boss, a prophetic person passed through my life, spent about 15 minutes with me and my wife. And the person said, there was a contract between you and God. It's written there 5 years. God says, don't change the contract. That was amazing. I wish every of my decision is like that, but that was the only one time where God came without a shadow of doubt and stopped me from handing in that resignation. Says, go, don't change the contract. And I knew that God wanted me to be there. So that's the long story short of it. So there is a place for prophetic, but prophetic cannot be the only voice that navigate you and I.
Wow, that's indeed inspiring. Let's listen to the prophetic, but it's 1 quarter. It may not be the full picture of everything as well.
Oh, by the way, that's just my humble opinion. Okay. Pastor Sam Kyong, Joel, Dr. Chiu says differently, then they are right. Okay, that's just me. Okay, yeah, I fully, wholly submitted to the leadership at SIBKL. Yes, that's
Thanks.
important. Yes.
Sure. Thanks, Pastor Tim. Don't worry, it's hard talk with Pastor Tim, all right? So we'll let him share all his thoughts and opinions. We want to jump into your business a little bit. So there've been a couple of questions about how you have managed to not take bribes, things like that. How you've managed to run your restaurant, and to feed the poor and underprivileged. How do you manage that to still achieve a good bottom line? How do you do that in the business world?
So everybody that does business, first of all, you must sort through that your business works. Okay. I've met a lot of people who wanted to start business and they wanted to do the business and with this whole big desire, which is great, but you must make sure your business is profitable. So take it purely from a business point of view, work through your model, work through your strategy, work through whatever it is. Okay. Let me answer the first one, the bribery one, right? The bribery one was really a journey of, okay, so let me say this. When I first joined Datacraft, all the bribery issue, I did not make the decision. I told my boss, I do not want to do anything with it. My boss was both kind and also cannot trust me. Just in case that everything, oh, bribery, I know. So my boss said, every time you have a problem like that, you pass it to me. So I will just say, oh, talk to my boss. At least the first 2 years. And that was very easy for me. And I absolutely do not want to do any parts of it. I have no idea. I do not want to be the person that handed the envelope. I absolutely just transparent. I just do my good job. The bosses deal with it. 2 years later, I now handle a business unit. My boss said, Tim, now you got to decide. Now the decision, the ball is at my court. Then I make a decision of not wanting to give bribe. So it's a journey of being there. And once I was there, so my boss doesn't care. He says, if you lost this deal, you just fine for me because you are responsible for your unit. And I just did, okay? So I wanted to say that I think when it comes to all this bribery, you need to understand a bigger understanding of biblical take on bribery, which is God is more upset on the people who implement those than the victim. But it doesn't mean that you're a victim, you always just do it. It doesn't mean that. But it's very important that biblically, or at least that's the way I understand the Bible, the people who initiate, who maneuver, who create. For example, when I was dealing with the labor force, Entrepreneur Assam House, that's the restaurant. It's set up for bribery because you just have to go through agent after agent after agent. The entire system is set up for that. So to navigate that and to stand for righteousness takes really a lot of conviction and faith. So I tell businessmen who don't have conviction, you have to decide for yourself. So a true story of one businessman that got saved from our church. It took him a journey of 8 years to eventually say no to all bribery. The first year he says, Pastor, I can only say no to anything below 100,000. Anything above that, Pastor, I have no faith. I said, never mind, say no to less than 100,000. He grew his faith. After 8 years, he literally said no to millions. Has he reached he hasn't, but he just grew his faith. So I want you to know that growing your faith is very important. It wasn't just say, oh, Pastor say no, I just say no. It has to really come out from you. Okay, so I have a certain conviction. So which is why I did what I did. What was the second question? What was it?
How do you manage your restaurant, feeding the poor, the underprivileged?
Yeah. So you must make sure you're profitable. For sure, you must make sure it's profitable. And the rest of it is you decide the sphere how you want to do it. So I was in Pujong. So my first step was to find out all the orphanages and think about how can we do that and which is the poor area and what we can do for that. Then so that it's closer to home, right? So that's how I did it. But obviously you must do it. You must be profitable. But because I've got a lot of suppliers, so I try to do it together with my supplier. So I make it known to my supplier. I give everybody an option. I tell them these are the poor. I will guarantee business from my side. I'm going to do this. If you want to participate, you participate. So all of them participate. So the fruit guy gave some fruits. The chicken guy gave some chicken. The veggie guy gave some veggie. And we're able to have a weekly supply for the needs. Yeah.
Wow, not bad. Find the needs around you and get everybody on board to fill that need. Interesting. I mean, I think this conversation is definitely blowing my mind. And I was talking to Pastor Tim, if nobody else is blessed, I'm sure I'm going to be blessed because I'm the one asking the questions, right? So yeah, I've been blessed so far. We want to go into the whole sacred secular divide. Well, it shouldn't be a divide, but how did you introduce the gospel? How do you bring your faith? And then how you've talked about so many of your co-workers, your colleagues, employees who have accepted Christ and are currently in your church. How do you bring that into your workplace?
I tell you what not to do. The worst to do is to be religious. Religious are people who had everything in their desk. It's all about Jesus, but their character is the furthest from Jesus. That is religious. Screensaver, Jesus loves you. But the worst to attend meeting, the most unproductive. You do not want to be that. Okay. I honestly think when it comes to the marketplace, when it comes to reaching out to people, it is the simplicity is really relationship. What makes Jesus incredible wasn't a slogan. What makes Jesus incredible was he came, he dwelt among us. The more we know how to dwell among people, be where they are. So if you have a homosexual friend, learn how to dwell among them. Of course, you have to think how you want to do that. The love, the acceptance, the conversation. I talk about interpreting culture. I think all that helps you to really know how to journey with people powerfully. Sometimes I think we say too much, but we love too little. Or we say too much, we don't listen well. So for me, I do try to spend as much time just listening to really understand where they are. And then, really ask, how can God make a difference in where they are? I think it's as simple as that. So I'm not an event kind of a guy. I'm really simple in terms of, I think the power is learning how to love people unconditionally and then bring who God is into their world. Yeah. So, yeah.
Wow, interesting. Wow, you bring who God is into their world. I think that's something for all of us to think about, and even seek God in every step of the way. And even that, I mean, the maybe it's going to be one of the last few questions. If any of you have questions, go ahead and ask. But I'm going to just jump into this, just the last part. And since you've been in full-time ministry, and it's also interesting, it's been the past 3-4 years, right? So how has church, as we see it, changed? Because it's inevitably changed because of the pandemic. And you mentioned earlier that we find it so difficult to bring people back into church, to come to church physically when they are all over the world. Everybody wants to go overseas right now, right? So how has church changed, and what can we do as a church as well to not just embrace that change, but thrive in this change, in this definitely changed environment?
I'm not a good person to answer that question well, honestly, but I want you to know that it is going to be an ongoing conversation for a while. So all churches are trying. Some try to play the online space. Some really like the influencer concept, and people try to play the TikTok, the whatever, so that they become an influencer. So there are many really concept from New Hof to so many of them. Okay, you can go and listen all of that. I honestly think the pandemic is helping church to think one thing: how to be personal with people. Because the pandemic wasn't able to have events. For the first time, the church is stripped off to think event, but to think personal. To think personal means we must be the master in loving people and relating people. The Bible has a one another passages about, I think maybe 61 of them or 59, I can't recall. Forgive, accept, whatever. Because Jesus was the master in this relational package, forgiveness, all of that. Prefer one another. I feel that the more we know how to live out the one another, the more we can really see lives change. That's just my simple understanding. So pandemic has stripped the church from that, at least from a evangelism point of view. So in the pandemic, I did my own, discovering God, whatever. I've led about 80 over people to Christ. It's all just learning how to be personal, just learning how to move into their life, hear them out, find their pain spot, and powerfully engage them. And think, how can God make a difference in their life at that moment? So it's so simple, but it's a lot of focus on that. Versus when we try to do an event, we spend that 30, 40 hours thinking of an event. What kind of backdrop we have, make it Instagrammable. What we all going to wear, the same t-shirt, looks cool. What kind of posting we want to have. Nothing wrong with that. Event people will think of that. But when all that took over what it means to dwell among them. So I think the pandemic kind of stripped us of that and to think how to love people unconditionally. Okay, that's just for me. On a strategic point of view, the pandemic should force the church to rethink through this space. So we thought it through. We decided to kickstart post-pandemic with a few church plants. So for past 1 or 2 years, we shifted life group, repositioned people, so they were able to believe God to, so, but we are small, we are nothing like, SIBKL. And so I'm not good at answering this question, honestly. I don't have the answer. It's an ongoing conversation, but I do know being personal is incredibly powerful.
Thanks for that, Pastor Tim. Last question. I think it's going to be personal to you. So you've talked a lot about being personal, being relational. You've talked about your reference to Jesus. Personally, I mean, you have talked about that so much. How do you manage that one-on-one and then bringing your church to the thousands, I believe, and to deal with that? Because when you grow to that size, there's a meganess, there is a corporateness that needs to fall in. So how have you managed that transition personally? And you are the senior pastor, right? So how do you manage that transition?
Yeah. Again, I don't have a good answer. I'm trying to raise as many leaders that know how to think like that. But I think it has to do a bit of my DNA. That means I enjoy people. So it was intuitive of me to just connect. So whenever I meet someone new, I try to exchange mobile phone. But to see the whole church doing that, we are far from it. But I think gradually more and more people are learning. But I don't know. I don't have a good answer. Sorry, Joel.
It's okay. Thank you, Pastor Tim. I think it's just you. One attracts the other, right? And then it brings it to many people. We are running out of time, but I'm just going to ask Pastor Tim, if there's one nugget of wisdom, one thing that you want to leave with us this evening, and thanks again for being here today on the end of the first quarter of 2022. But what's one thing, one word of wisdom or one sentence of wisdom that you'd like to leave with us today?
Yeah. For me, all of us who work in the marketplace, my encouragement for you is to really write a powerful chapter of your 30, 40 years of your life. So if you were to sit down with Nehemiah and ask him, how was your marketplace experience? He has an incredible story to tell. Because he'll tell you a story of how God used him to change the entire nation of Israel by rebuilding the wall. You're going to sit down with Peter. He'll tell you, in my fish business, right? One day I met Christ, makes all that little difference. Everybody in the marketplace, 30, 40 years, you need to have a powerful God story to tell. And I think you must have that meta narrative. You must come to that point where it says, God, what's my story to tell? And I pray that it is a story that at least contains that 4 chapters where godliness, the grace of God, generosity, and the gospel is being filled with the pages of your life. Yeah.
All right. And with that, we want to thank Pastor Tim for his time. Why don't we give him a round of applause? And if you're online, you can appreciate him with a thumbs up or an emoticon.